Hello, good evening po sa lahat.
Good evening po.
Good evening, Doc.
Good evening. Magandang gabi. Kung narinig niyo yung background ko, pasensya na.
Sinong mauuna?
Never daw.
Si Sir Emer po. Opo.
Okay.
Tapos si Sir JV, pati po si Doc Bang.
Okay. So, hintay lang tayo ng mga ano. We can start at 6:15, no?
Opo, Doc.
Sorry na late ako. Traffic. Good evening po ulit sa ating lahat.
Good evening, Doc.
Sige po, it's already 6:16. Maybe we can start. Our three presenters are here with us today. So welcome po sa ating last leg of the Work in Progress webinars for the first semester of the academic year 2020-2021. And for this webinar, we have three presentations coming from Dr. Robert Montaña on applying Allan Gerwith, it should be Gerwith, Sir Bob. Gerwith's principle of genetic consistency to global policies and human rights in a post-pandemic world. And then we have Sir JB Ignacio with his presentation, Academic Freedom and the Possibility of Learning, and Sir Gonzales with his presentation titled Different Connotations of Human Dignity. So for our first presentation for tonight, we have Sir Emer, no? And then, nga pala, thank you, Anton and Aldrin, for preparing our session hall for tonight. So let's start. Okay. So ang moderator ni Sir Emer is Sir JB. And then after the presentation, we have JB's presentation, and Sir Bob will moderate, and then after that we have Sir Bob and Sir Emer will moderate.
Okay.
Okay, sige po. So let's start.
Yeah. Permission to share screen?
Open na po, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Is my audio, video clear?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
All good, all good.
All good. Good. The concept of dignity in St. Thomas Aquinas and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In this our era of post-truth, when perennial concepts in ethico-political philosophy have been undermined, basic human rights are denied in the name of apparently good governance, truth is revised and edited out of convenience, and oftentimes truth is dictated upon by popularity, negotiation, or approximation. At present trends, some scholars in bioethics prefer to delete dignity from the moral lexicon. Both the pro-euthanasia and the anti-euthanasia camps use dignity in their respective arguments. The pro-cloning and the anti-cloning in stem cell research both depend on the idea of human dignity. It is their line of thinking that since dignity is supposedly a universal property of every person, then it is a given constant, and it is better to cancel it off on both sides of the debate in a moral issue. In addition, many tyrannical leaders, especially in third world countries, do consider human dignity as a mere alibi given by the minority or the opposition to block or delay the dictatorial programs of the incumbent administration. As the concept of dignity has been rendered ambiguous or equivocal, consequently, the ignorant masses and the gullible poor are made to think of dignity as optional or without a morally binding effect. On the contrary, this essay stands by the prudence of the angelic doctor and the wisdom of the League of Nations. By chronological order, let us begin with the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas and then move on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are several insights by Aquinas that describe human living in dignity. One may begin by asking the question, which functions or operations of man do make man as a unique being? Ideally, each person aims for a complete life which is lived according to natural reason and in virtue. Despite the imperfections of earthly living, Man wishes to attain happiness or flourishing. Man is able to pursue such opportunities, for instance, in being fit and healthy and enjoying friendship with his fellow men. For St. Thomas, the person has two purposes: the proximate end and the ultimate end. The ultimate goal in heaven is the non-stop beatific vision of and presence with the uncaused cause. The proximate goal on earth is to live a completely reasonable and morally excellent life. To attain human flourishing, man relies on practical reason and the natural moral law. This idea is not exactly the progress of the individual person, but instead the common flourishing of each person's community. The primary goal of the natural moral law, as understood by man's practical reason, is the attainment of happiness in earthly living. That is, a certain level of contentment achieved and shared with others. Fulfillment is gained only through the human acts, excluding the acts of man, because self determination happens by free choices. Aquinas refers to this idea as mastery over one's own acts, which must be devoid of any internal or external influences. This is a major prerequisite, and it is undeniable as any physical law or law of nature. At the same time, man, in his pursuit of happiness and flourishing, considers freely, choosing the concrete alternatives that benefit all of mankind. The natural moral law, do good and avoid evil, is a moral first principle, not a metaphysical one. Each person realizes it for himself through his own practical reason. Just as to pursue is the contradictory of to avoid, and as the good is the contradictory of the evil or non good, St. Thomas concludes that man can do only one choice at a given time. He recommends that man pursues the good and avoids the evil. This axiom is made as a moral first principle after deriving it from a metaphysical first principle, that is, the principle of non contradiction. Subsequently, more specific recommendations can be derived from this moral first principle, such as to do charity or giving alms to the poor, and to avoid murder, adultery, or theft. Basic goods are food, shelter, and clothing, but there are other basic goods. The other distinctive choices worthy of pursuit by man are: 1. Maintaining life itself, 2. Marriage, family, and children nurturing, 3. Knowledge or education, 4. Fellowship or community life, 5. Work and practical skills for labor, and 6. Knowing and relating to the divine. Aquinas suggests that these basic goods or choices lead to the attainment of communal flourishing. To live with dignity includes to live virtuously. This begins in applying one's practical reason in moral choices or issues. It is by using one's conscience. The informed conscience presupposes sound judgment and practical reasonableness, and this may be called being prudent, especially when one is tempted to choose non intelligent alternatives. Conscience is not exactly the tiny voice you hear inside you when you doubt which choice to do or which bath soap is more beneficial to buy. Conscience is the practical reason reviewing one's stock knowledge about the correctness or wrongness of possible actions or the advantages and disadvantages of some alternatives present at hand. Whether one's conscience is well informed and correct or outdated and erroneous, nonetheless, one is duty bound to follow his own conscience. Aquinas, of course, calls this as the obligatory force of conscience. In case someone finds the natural moral law as burdensome to comply with, it was further revised by Aquinas into the very ideal moral principle of love. No one could be wrong if he should love his neighbor as himself. As a theologian, Aquinas considers this duty of love as a first principle, which is self evident to all humans, just like the Ten Commandments of the Old Testament. Some contemporary scholars on Thomism interpret this theological ideal in a more secular way. For them, it implies that every authentic human act or choice must be open toward integral human fulfillment. That is, the self realization of all persons in a given community. The moral first principle of loving your neighbor as yourself is very inclusive. It covers all persons without distinction. To love the other is to extend kindness to him or to wish goodwill upon him. Such a duty to love is a gesture of authentic justice, and it may even be considered as a basic right. Specific moral guidelines or standards are direct implications of the moral first principle of doing the good and avoiding the evil. With this sense of obligation, the primary goods or specific choices in life are pursued by each person towards realization, towards self realization. This perspective may be given a utilitarian meaning by saying that each person aims for the most gain of goodness and the least evil or harm which cannot be avoided. To illustrate this, Aquinas uses homicide and marriage as examples. Any killing of another person is intrinsically wrong because it directly contradicts the loving of your neighbor as yourself, although non intentional killing or homicide can be justified when it happens in an act of self defense. Aquinas implies that at given times, the secondary moral principles may bend or vary depending on the real intention of the human act and on the non anticipation of a bad consequence that may probably arise. Marriage is a primary human good. It has two purposes: the bearing of children and their proper nurturing, and the exclusive permanent commitment to being united with one spouse in mind, body, and reciprocity in domestic life. These two purposes are co equal and non separable. The conjugal sexual act allows the spouses to experience and express the good of their marriage, wherein their mutual delight and pleasure is a reaffirmation of their commitment. The sexual choices contradictory to the good of marriage are treating one's spouse like a prostitute in a sexual intercourse and having an erotic exchange with someone other than one's spouse. For Aquinas, these sexual acts are not natural because they do not pursue and respect the good of marriage. The good reciprocal relation between the spouses gives security for their children. Then, consequently, such security contributes positively to the good of the bigger community. Other wrongful sexual acts like rape and seduction of the innocent or vulnerable are grave instances of injustice that do not maintain the good of the community. So far, all of these ways and means mentioned here fall into that part of human dignity in living according to natural reason. Let us now proceed to the other part, that is, of human dignity in living according to virtues. To be humane is to be virtuous. Each person may flourish or deviate in the journey of opportunities from his origins to his self realization. The rule of thumb suggested by Aquinas is the mean. the midway, or the balance between two opposite extremes. Thus, to stay in the middle is to live according to virtue. The cardinal or primary virtues are prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. To be prudent is to weigh the pros and the cons of an issue and to consider the more beneficial for oneself, but not to worsen the disadvantages for the other. To be just is to give to the other what is due him. Courage or fortitude is the inner strength to face the opposing challenges in life and not to give up. Temperance is effort to tame one's pleasurable desires with honest, non biased reasons. Here, Aquinas insinuates that the person who consciously practices these four priority virtues is one who lives in and maintains human dignity. Where or in what context do all this happen? This These must occur within the bigger community. The first principle of loving one's neighbor as oneself presupposes that human beings coexist in a political community of mutual needs and wants. In ancient Greek civilization, this was the polis or city state, according to Plato and Aristotle. Aquinas went beyond this self sufficient city state. He implies that the ultimate concern of every human is the flourishing or fulfillment of all persons and communities. He stopped short at expounding on a theory of a group of communities or nations with mutual needs and wants. Apparently, it was not yet then an urgent need of his time to conceptualize a plurality of nations with the consequent relations between the member states and also among the ethnic groups of people within each state or nation. Let us proceed to the Universal Declaration. The opening section of this Universal Declaration states very clearly that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It must have sounded compelling enough that after some other declarations by the United Nations and many of the constitutions of the civilized nations across the planet re echoed the inviolability or the inviolable dignity of each human being. Where did that famous concept of dignity come from? The Universal Declaration followed the founding charter of the United Nations, which states their faith in the dignity and worth of the human person. Setting aside the Latin etymology of dignitas, the UN packaged the Western idea of dignity as universally understandable and having its corresponding equivalent concept or term in each non Western culture. Even the Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, and Confucian traditions do agree that dignity is the distinctive value or worth of and the respect owed to every human being. The idea of the primordial value of each person was or can be traced back, way back, to the Stoic philosophers among the early Greek pre-Socratic thinkers. However, it was the Judeo-Christian version of this idea as the Imago Dei that became popular in the Western civilization. As an Imago Dei, each person participates in a limited way in transcendent divine freedom, reason, power, creativity, moral concern, and love. Most of the drafters of the Universal Declaration were secular thinkers, but the few influential composers were Christians or theists, like Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the former American president, Dr. Charles Malik, the Harvard educated Arab philosopher from Lebanon, and Professor Rene Cassin, the international jurist from France. Nonetheless, the majority drafters saw at that setting that any mention of a given religion was not necessary, It might even be a cause of friction or division. The relative abstractness of the idea of human dignity in the Declaration is more of a benefit than a liability. Taking it away from any religious context or philosophical anthropology, the concept of dignity may be seen as weak or without a backbone. However, this so-called secular neutrality preserves its capacity to serve as a symbolic evocation of the primacy and mystery of the human person in a universal and open-ended approach. The idea of human dignity may be regarded as a heuristic, a default way of thinking about man as automatically having a built-in value worthy of respect and preservation. As a heuristic, the idea of dignity gains more meaningful content by its constant reference or repetitive use, and more insights related to it may be discovered because its meaning cannot be fully understood all at once. The idea of human dignity is like the ideas of world peace and common good, which are knowable realities that we do have some partial knowledge of, but we cannot fully explain or attain. Human dignity refers to the value of being a person. A person is a sentient being who has the capacities or the potential to develop the capacities to consciously inquire, imagine, feel, understand, know, decide, and act. All these capacities are exercised within the freedom to choose and decide towards self determination or self realization. A person admits that his freedom is necessarily attached to his sense of responsibility. A person is aware that he is unique and irreplaceable, and that he can suffer and be vulnerable due to the wrong choices made by others or even by himself. There are four connotations closely related to human dignity. These are freedom, responsibility, irreplaceability, and vulnerability. Human beings have a non deniable right to the conditions and opportunities that allow them to willingly and fully develop as persons because they are responsibly self determining, unique, and vulnerable. Thus, some human rights are the chances to be educated, have a family, speak freely, practice one's religious beliefs, and belong to an organization. Even when a person is poor, sick, disabled, illiterate, or mentally challenged, he or she is still with dignity and basic rights. There is a fine yet crucial distinction between inherent human dignity and achieved human dignity. Inherent dignity is innate in a person since birth. It is not something to be gained or to work for. Meanwhile, achieved dignity refers to those conditions or opportunities which need to be maintained to allow the realization of a humane existence. Thus, the newborn baby projects only an inherent human dignity, while his working single parent mother projects an achieved human dignity on top of an inherent human dignity. To maintain and achieve human dignity, some specific rights and liberties must be upheld or maintained, such as equality before the law, freedom from forms of discrimination, freedom to marry and have a family, right to own private property, freedom of religion, right to speak freely, right to access proper health care. All these rights are necessary for a person's dignity and the humane development of his rational self. Although it enumerates these ideal ways, the Declaration cannot concretely impose each of them specifically. Why? Because most of the respective constitution of each nation is patterned after this heuristic or category of human dignity, but the concrete application or upholding of these rights or liberties is up to the specific tradition or legislation of a given community. For example, in the Philippines, the rampant violations of human rights by the Duterte administration in the war on drugs, plus the red tagging, arrests, and detentions of suspected quote unquote enemies of the state, while the International Criminal Court or the Human Rights Commission seem to do the barking only, but with no bite, so to speak. The truly basic aspect of dignity is the inherent human dignity. This is the metaphysical foundation of the affirmation of human rights guaranteed by the Universal Declaration. The so-called rights are the link between inherent human dignity and achieved human dignity. Since a person ontologically possesses inherent dignity, then he is politically entitled to those freedoms and protections that would allow him to attain a dignified living in his given specific abode. Inherent dignity is still present when a person lives in crime or poverty, when he or she is jobless. Inherent dignity is a basic trait of criminals or saints, of cowards or heroes, or of drug addicts or healthy, normal people. Inherent dignity is the pre-established equal and irreducible worth which a person need not wish for. It is neither an accomplishment nor a capacity-based behavior. Conclusion. There is no single treatise by St. Thomas Aquinas or an exact section in his writings wherein he defined what is human dignity or where he enumerated the essential elements of how it is to be authentic human among other created beings. Rather, his thoughts on human dignity are spread out and embedded in his socio-political teachings, all within his ethical writings. Aquinas did not dwell anymore on the Imago Dei, image of God mindset, which is already a presupposed category or ideal coming from the teachings of Jesus Christ and followed most probably by majority of Christians all over the world. Aquinas specified those rights every person ought to have in the community, and that as he exercises them, he gains happiness or contentment, in Latin felicitas or beatitudo, which is most suitable to his human dignity. The influence of the ideas of St. Thomas in the Universal Declaration cannot be denied. The influential members of the Committee on Human Rights between 1947 to 1949, namely Malik, Cassin, and Roosevelt, had been very much exposed to Christian anthropology, which is predominantly Thomistic. Malik, as a philosopher, was an ardent Thomist. Cassin, although of Jewish ancestry, had close friends in the Catholic social action groups. Roosevelt, as a wife and mother, was a devout Christian. This observation of a Thomistic inspiration in that declaration was even reaffirmed by Jacques Maritain, one of the experts on the philosophy of Aquinas, in his political writings. For some postmodern commentators, the concept of human dignity has been reduced to a mere decoration in the seemingly toothless document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nonetheless, most of the advocates of nonviolence or peaceful means of protest or amicable resolution of disputes do often expound human dignity as their bedrock guiding principle. Some tyrannical minded leaders of nations in their respective platforms of governance are seriously cautioned or slowed down by the ideals of human dignity and human rights. Abuses in wars, both aggressive and defensive, or in border conflicts, are abated by the perennial reminders shouted out by the Universal Declaration. This document may not be a bite or a sting to those individuals or groups who often violate human rights, but it has a conscious effect on the violators. It causes a disturbing remorse, a persistent inner worry that sways the violators to do more humane innovations or personal reforms. In solidarity with all the advocates of the Worldwide Human Rights Day commemorated every 10th of December, we had it a few days ago, may this simple essay be a humble contribution in reiterating the urgent need to uphold human rights and to respect human dignity, and not just to pay lip service to these moral guides and ideas. Thank you very much for listening.
Sir Franz, ako na ba?
Mag-question muna po, Doc JV. Open the floor sa questions po.
Hindi pa ako doc. Hindi pa ako doc. Chill ka lang. Alright.
Sorry.
Thank you, Sir Emer.
Hi.
It's been a long while since I've heard a Thomistic paper that is strongly inspired by the Thomistic tradition that we have upheld here in the university, and it's a welcome note to hear those words again. No, and I find it weird to be commenting on you tonight because you were my thesis advisor when I was in fourth year. Anyway, I have some questions following the sequences that you have.
All right.
First, how does one lose dignity, human dignity? How do you lose it?
I think ang nalulose mo lang talaga ay yung achieved level siguro, yung achieved human dignity. Pero yung sa inherent, hindi siya. Magandang tanong, yan nga. Actually, I am about to expound it, yung suggestion ni Doc Pao noon to extend it to Axel Honneth. But then, I kept it within Thomas Aquinas for two reasons. Nandiyan na ba si Doc Joby? Wala na, wala pa. Kasi enrolled ako sa philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. Kaya, synthesis paper siya, then tin-improve ko na rin. So, iniwanan ko muna sina Butler, sina Axel, para tapusin ko to. Kasi may deadline sa, sa 18. Yun lang. Now, how do you lose it? I was also trying my best to see it on that line in Aquinas. Pero kay Aquinas, parang walang instance that you lose your dignity. And even in the Universal Declaration, there is also no instance that you may lose that, yung una, yung metaphysical, yung ontological, yung inherent human dignity. Because, yeah, the victim lost his dignity, pero the murderer also still has dignity. So, siguro, hanggang doon sa punto na humane pa rin ang treatment mo sa bilangguan sa kanya. Tapos, well, even Aquinas allows death penalty, di ba? Sometimes, for some reason.
I was about to go to that particular issue.
Yeah.
I find it one of the greatest contradictions in Aquinas,
Yes.
as far as I understand it, because he considers life as an inalienable right.
Correct.
And when you say inalienable, it is something that you cannot give,
Yeah.
or cannot be taken away.
Yes.
So if life is inalienable, and if human dignity is dependent on human life, because you must have
Exactly.
life first before you can have dignity.
Yeah.
How did Aquinas try to resolve that contradiction of
Correct. Okay. Magandang tanong, Jake. May dalawa. Except, ito mawawala sa'yo. Pag they endanger yung buhay mo as a criminal, endangers seriously the flourishing of the community. Pero vague pa rin yun. Vague pa rin ng definition doon. Walang clear cut. Pangalawa, kung isa kang matinding hardcore heretic. Ngayon, tanong, sino magde-decide ng iyong pagiging hardcore, unrepentant heretic? Mag-establish sila ng Inquisition group ng mga, well, of course, ng panahon nila, ng mga Dominicans, syempre. Nandiyan na si Torquemada and whatever. Pero hanggang doon lang ang sinabi niya. And I don't know whether yung mga sumunod sa kanya ay talagang dogmatically sound theology ang kanilang alam. So yun yung two exceptions to that.
Mhm.
Ngayon, natutuwa ang mga pro-death penalty kasi
Exactly.
kinukote nila palagi si Aquinas.
Mhm.
Lalo na yung sa sinabi na, endangered na yung state, mga ganun, endangered na yung gobyerno. So, i-allow natin ang death penalty. I think that will be subjected to another, that could be another topic. And Dr. Joby Carino came up with an article. I used it as a reference, pero dito hindi ko siya nagamit. Pero if ever I venture into death penalty, he is a good one. And if Doc Joby Carino is there, we might as well ask him to comment siguro maya-maya pag nakapasa.
I especially like the tone that you have presented at the beginning when you in a way try to hit the current administration regarding the regarding human rights violations. But as you have said in your own words, that the concept of human dignity is like the definition of world peace, the definition of
Yeah,
anong isa? World peace and common
common good.
common good. No, it's something out there, but you don't have a full grasp of it,
Yeah.
and because it has a loose understanding in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
The president can easily say, well, it's okay to shoot people, right?
Kaya nga eh.
On the
Yeah.
defense of, as you also mentioned, human dignity can actually have a utilitarian perspective.
Correct.
And,
Parang
and
ganon, yung mga comments nila.
yeah, and
Madaming nagsasabi talaga na it's a decoration, let's take it out. Pero kinuha ko siya, pinick up ko siya dahil sa klase namin, wala pa rin si Doc Pao. So, dahil sa klase namin kay Doc Pao, sabi ko, on a personal note, my cousin, 1 year ahead of me, si Edmond, was murdered in Pangasinan. And then, yung murderer was a drug addict who is a relative of a friend of mine. Okay? And yung pinsan niyang yan, saka ako, nagtataka yung buong bayan because we're friends. We're close friends. And I wasn't allowed to go home for 1 year kasi sa threat nila na baka gantihan. So tinanong ko yan sa klase namin kay Judith Butler kung up to what extent ba yan or abstract concept lang ba yan. And the very good reply of Doc Pao is that yes, it would be very emotional on a personal experience, especially yung victim is a loved one, a family member. But nonetheless, Pao said, yung concept of human dignity cannot remain to be too abstract na napakanandyan at lumulutang, sabi niya. And then, he gave me the clue na meron daw sinasabi si Butler that there is a kind of a built-in interconnectedness. Some call it solidarity. Some call it, ano ba yan? That connects everyone, the interdependence. Even Butler herself, hindi pa masyadong clear. Then, habi ko, so I ventured into it and I'm just using it as a launch pad, okay, as a stepping stone for the next. And I found an application or an extension in Thomas Aquinas. Then later on, hopefully, I would make it it to be extended also up to Axel Honneth or just Butler.
when I was still exploring Aquinas when in my early years, I really found that concept of dignity kasi when I was in nursing, no, yung
Yeah, of course.
kasi nandun,
Bioethics.
yeah, and human dignity is always there in their bioethics, of course, sa UST, ganun, no. But this issue, this problem of human dignity is actually problematic as far as Aquinas is concerned. That is why, in a way, I had to abandon
Yeah.
that concept of Aquinas and relied on Kant. Kasi
Correct.
ano niya is
Correct.
ang hirap i-defend talaga. Kasi
Correct.
yeah.
Tama. I agree with you. And actually, yes, I also agree with Pao that it need not be a Catholic Christian thinker we can go on up to Kant. We can rest on Kant and extend it to Axel Honneth or even to Butler. Na doon ka na lang mag-end kay Kant para wala ng issue of religion.
Kasi para sa akin, Kant says it all already, so
Correct. Okay. Siyempre, nagtuturo ka ng mga Thomasian Christian nurses, so you have to go
Sure.
back to a bit of history. Thank you.
thank you, Sir Emer. Sir Anton or Sir Aldrin?
Wala po bang mag-ask po? Maybe there are others who have questions po para kay Sir Emer.
Thank you, Sir Emer.
Yeah, welcome.
Before we proceed po kay Sir JV.
Ano ba, Anton?
Sige po, Doc.
Okay. So, let's begin and listen to Sir JV.
Yep.
And everybody or any person who knows JV, we can easily equate him with education. So, siya ang specialista natin sa education.
Di naman, there are others.
Let's start na. Let's listen to Sir JV.
Okay. What I did, hold on, sharing my screen. I haven't reached that level like Sir Emer's paper, na may paper na actually. So I'm still building the scaffolding of the entire thing, you know. And I hope I can show you what I plan to do and hopefully to accomplish by the end of the term. So the title of my working title now, I'm still thinking of revising this, is Academic Freedom and the Possibility of Learning. Now, the reason why I came to work on academic freedom, because in my previous papers, on Aquinas on learning, on Kant on learning, on Freire on learning and education, all of them seem to converge on this problem of academic freedom. So even before the pandemic started, I've been looking at recent issues concerning. I hope you can see the slides now. Okay. There have been tons of news reporting all over the world stating that academic freedom is under attack. There's always an abridge of academic freedom. For example, in Canada alone, I think there are several hundreds of cases of violations of academic freedom, especially those concerning research. Now, for example, microbiologist, no, who was commissioned to do research by a tobacco company, stated in his paper that smoking is bad, no, generally speaking, and because of that statement, no, she was removed from her position in the university, and she was a tenured faculty member. So there is now an attack on an academician's freedom to publish the findings of his or her research, and we can see all over the world, from even in Europe, US, Canada, and even here in Southeast Asia, like this is in Thailand, no. And now, of course, you know what happened in UP, the red tagging, and there was this one paper from the Manila Standard that even said that the state can abridge academic freedom for the sake of its other responsibilities. So where do we draw the line here in academic freedom? So this is the reason why I chose academic freedom. The two reasons: the convergence of my previous researches and the attack, or the global attack on academic freedom. Okay. Now, the concept of academic freedom is so broad. No, if I can't find really I really can't find a strong definition of it. But there are some interlocking concepts. Now, for example, from the American Federation of Teachers, they define academic freedom as the right of faculty members acting both as individuals and as a collective to determine whether outside interference, the college curriculum, the course content, teaching, student evaluation, and the conduct of scholarly inquiry. Now, in this definition of the American Federation of Teachers, we can see clearly there that academic freedom here is exercised by the faculty members, by the teachers, no? Or sometimes the academic staff. Okay. But basically, they are looking at academic freedom within the scope of the teachers. But let me show you another definition. This is from Randy David in his 2008 paper, Modernity and the University. And I highlighted that particular part. Academic freedom is meant to be the university's right to determine for itself solely on academic grounds who may teach, what may be taught, and how it shall be taught, and who may be admitted to study. Now, Professor David's definition raised a red flag in my mind because in his definition, he is already implying that pedagogy or the method of teaching a particular uh, discipline falls under the jurisdiction of the institution and not of the faculty member. So I don't know which one is correct. Is the American Teachers Association correct, or is Professor Randy David correct? Now, the 1987 Constitution, the Philippine 1987 Constitution shows that academic freedom is exercised by three entities: the institution, the faculty, and the students. Now, there are certain powers of academic freedom, like defining the curriculum, determining content, pedagogy, inquiry. Now, these are the basic aspects within academic freedom, the basic exercises of power. But the question that I am raising now is, who has the authority to exercise those rights? Is curriculum dependent? Is the university or the institution be the one to determine curriculum, content, and pedagogy? Or in what level, on what degree do teachers actually have? This is very problematic for us, especially here in UST, because as you all know, we went to this cited program, and if we follow Professor David's definition of academic freedom, it means that even pedagogy can be imposed on us by the administration because because pedagogy belongs to the learning institution and not to the faculty. So that's a big problem for me. So my objectives for my paper are as follows. I'd like to present recent concepts and discussions on what academic freedom is, and to present the different threats to academic freedom. I place a red question mark there because I'm still wondering if it's still within the scope of my paper, because it might be too long for a journal article if I include that. Then I'd like to ground my work using Kant. No, I like Kant so much, and his philosophy of teaching and learning, and hopefully to formulate a Kantian definition of academic freedom in the context of learning. Now, unlike Freire, Kant never wrote like something like the Critique of Pure Reason, an entire treatise of about his philosophy of education, but there is a smorgasbord, so to speak, of loose ideas about what Kant thought of what a university is, of what teaching is, of what learning is. So I'd like to look at those ideas and look at it and use it as my lens to formulate a concept of academic freedom. So the paradigm is quite simple. I'd like to look at academic freedom and the possibility of talking about the threats to academic freedom and using the philosophy of Kant to determine learning. So that's the working paradigm I'm trying to use. And for my research questions, I'm not saying these are the proper order, but basically these are the essential things that I'd like to ask and to find out. What is the scope of academic freedom? Who can exercise the different aspect of academic freedom? How does academic freedom affect learning? And what is Immanuel Kant's philosophy of education? So, if I can answer all those four questions, the hope is to reach the fifth objective, which is to actually formulate an idea of what academic freedom is. This is very important for us, not just because we are faculty members, but because we are also researchers. Um, to what extent can we actually use our freedom to do our own research? And we all know that in the recent past we've been bombarded by some problems because of funding issues, no? So is funding a threat, no, for example, of academic freedom? Oops, yeah, ito pala yung fifth objective. And the methodology is also, of course, standard for us in the humanities. It's qualitative in design, using philosophical theories on academic freedom and Kant's philosophy of education, using the database of Science Direct, PubMed, EBSCOhost. I'm sorry that we don't usually include this in our papers in philosophy, but I had to place this because I submit papers not only in philosophy journals but also in education journals. No? So in the social sciences, they have a different way of writing, which was a little bit confusing for me at the beginning. And then some limitations. There's a ton of research on academic freedom. I can go back as far as 1875, but I'm gonna limit it from 2010 to 2020. For the meantime, no, for the meantime, I just want to have a bird's eye view of everything before I really pin the tail, so to speak. And then for Kant's work, I'm going to focus on three papers that he wrote. Um, these papers were published after his death. What is Enlightenment? Lectures on Pedagogy, and the Conflict of the Faculties. In my previous research projects, I talked about what is Enlightenment and Lectures on Pedagogy. The Conflict of the Faculties is something I have not yet started to read, and hopefully by the end of the Christmas break, I'll be able to do that. And then here are some initial findings, and I hope you find it interesting about academic freedom. Here's from Martin in 2011. He says, as philosophers, academics working in universities have no moral duty to be relevant or impactful in any immediate, short-term, or other narrowed sense of relevance or impact. This concept from Martin came out because of the issue that actually came out as early as Aristotle, that why should you study something that has no practical reason, no? Like economics, like physics, no? Or medicine for that sense. But he argues that we don't need to be uh, pragmatic all the time, because we are looking at philosophy as an end for itself, no, learning for itself. And then I have something from Metz in 2010. She says, the claim that academic freedom should be used solely to advance social justice. I'm focusing on namely, that academic freedom should be only used to advance social justice broadly construed. So Martin and Metz here would seem to be not seeing eye to eye, because Metz is looking at academic freedom is justified if it has a direct contribution to social justice or for the common good, as what Sir Emer previously said. So again, I really don't know what to say right now, but I'm looking at what they call this. This paper talks the CH sheet is about the Commission of Higher Education, and this is in Turkey. Okay, so her paper is about a reaction to academic freedom in Turkey. Then we have from Shoemaker in 2011, Western nations with highly developed university systems, our thinking about the concept and the actuality of academic freedom and the role of the university has in no way kept pace with the urgent and pressing changes in both media and internet freedoms around the world. Now, this is an interesting perspective because Shoemaker is arguing that if there is press freedom and if there is internet freedom, which people strongly defend in public, out in public, why are there no people defending academic freedom as loud as those who are defending internet and press or media freedom? And maybe because according to Shoemaker also, those who are fighting for academic freedom are only the academicians, and nobody really understands the value of academic freedom except those who are in the faculty. Oops. This is from Nelson. Academic freedom gives both students and the faculty the right to express their views in speech, writing, and through electronic communication, both on and off campus, without fear of sanction unless the manner of expression substantially impairs the rights of others, or in the case of faculty members, those views demonstrate that they are professionally ignorant, incompetent, or dishonest with regard to the discipline or field of expertise. I'd like to focus here. I chose this line from Nelson because it reminded me immediately of what the university is doing with regards to student discipline. When a student posts in Twitter or Instagram or even in Facebook his or her dismay about his or her experience in the university or in the college, the university can sanction the student. So is that a way? Is that academic freedom? Is that a violation of free speech if there is a threat by the university itself, which is supposed to be the seedbed of discourse? Here is from McKernan in 2011. Papansin nyo, 2010, 2011 pa lang ako kasi talagang ang dami. Guys, ang dami talaga. University administrator seems only interested in the bottom line here, saving funds through cost-cutting vital disciplinary appointments and even closing down what are regarded as unproductive departments. And this is, of course, related to what they call this? Related to funding in research. Not even research, but also things that are, for example, connected to tenureship, appointment of faculty members. No, for example, I'm not naming any institution yet, but there are certain institutions, I know this for a fact, that they would rather hire new faculty members instead of promoting to tenureship a previous faculty they have hired. No? So they let go a previously hired faculty member who has not yet reached tenure so that they can hire somebody new. So this is because of funding again. All right. So here's my current status right now in my project. I have what so far about 20. I've read about 20 more or less papers on academic freedom. I've read Kant previously, so I still have my notes from Kant, but I have to review them all over again. And as I mentioned a while ago, I haven't started with Kant's Conflict of the Faculties, and then I still have about another set of 30 journal papers still on the works. Okay, so I'm still in the reading status. And hopefully, by the end of this month, I can finish the following things: to continue my materials, to evaluate my objectives, and reformulate the research questions, and provide my skeletal outline by the end of the month. And so this is my target for this month, okay, to formulate my skeletal outline. And hopefully by March, I'll have my first draft of my uh, paper. So far, that's where I am. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sir JB. Buksan ko rin ang video ko. Before I open the floor to questions, may tanong muna ako, Sir JB.
Yes, sir.
Hindi ba siya teacher related or teacher based? Kasi normally, 'di ba, yung natural reaction natin, if a teacher is good enough, experienced enough, professional enough, the student would want the administrators to give more freedom to this teacher. Pero on the other hand, if siguro the teacher is not well experienced or problematic at that, baka yung mga students na would want the university to control or set limits to the actuations of the teacher. So, ang question ko, do you think there would be some form of injustice if academic freedom would be applied differently to different teachers depending on certain criteria, for instance?
Thank you, Sir Bob. No, that's a great question, because that is actually one of the problems I'm trying to solve. It's easy to say that if there's an experienced teacher, we can give more leeway to him or her. But for a newly appointed faculty member, there should be proper guidance. I agree with that. No, even if the faculty member seems to be problematic, at least at worst. No, but the thing is, what I'm saying is that we don't really know where academic freedom actually falls. I've read the Supreme Court rulings on academic freedom, the case between, I've read only two cases, no? Two Supreme Court cases. One is about Ateneo, and the other one is LaSalle. And but those two cases pertain only on the on the issue on academic freedom, on the problem who may teach. Malinaw yon sa Supreme Court that the institution has the power to choose the faculty members. That's clear. But what is becoming vague is the question on how to teach. Who now has that right to regulate pedagogy? Should it be the institution, or should it be members of the particular discipline? What I'm saying is that there are so many definitions of academic freedom na hindi sila nagja-jive together. Ganon.
Okay, thank you. So Rochi is raising his hand.
Opo, sir. Oo. Congratulations, Sir JB, ha.
Wala pa.
You may answer this, or you may not. You may take this as a comment. I don't know how will you accept this. Pero ang naisip ko lang, baka I know you have conceptualized, just like the rest of us, conceptualized the project before COVID.
Yes.
Yan. I don't know, baka pwedeng part 2 ng paper mo, or baka sa concluding portion. The status, paano ba? The status of academic freedom. I don't know what proper term. In this setup we have na online. Baka merong ganon, maisali mo siya to somehow update, paano ba? To make it more relevant, or you can also have it as entirely another new topic kasi nabanggit mo na yung the how to ayun na nga no to
Pedagogy part.
education, the pedagogy portion. Paano kaya ngayon yun paano siya ma-juxtapose dun sa present condition natin vis-a-vis with that of academic freedom? You may or you may not take those.
It's part of the consideration, and I came up with that issue already. I mean, I stumbled upon that issue. It happened in California, sometime I think August. Yeah, August or September. I can't really recall. What happened in California was that the state, no, the what do you call this? The education department of the state of California was imposing to their teachers. We're talking about primary and high school, okay? We're not talking about college, okay? The state, the education department of California was imposing certain things to do for their online classes. And after a few months, after a few weeks, the teachers reacted against it because what they're saying is that it's not working for them. It's not working for the students. No? So yeah, and in that case, there was now a conflict between the teacher and the administrators, who are the state department, and who now has a greater grasp of the situation. Is it the teachers who are in the grass level, or is it the state who imposes the learning outcomes on the students? So, as I mentioned a while ago, since we don't really have a clear-cut definition on how to exercise academic freedom, it's not like, for example, academic freedom is not the same with political freedom. No, political freedom is clear. You have the right to vote. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to assemble peacefully. No, malinaw eh. Malinaw yung mga gagawin, and who can do that. But in academic freedom, that those powers of pedagogy, the power of content, the power of curriculum, those things were not well defined in the idea of what academic freedom should be. Now, Finland, I think it was in 2009, participated in the Global Declaration of Academic Freedom. And if you read that, it only mentioned parts on how to protect the faculty. For us, faculty members, for us who are in the teaching field, those are favorable things. But of course, now if you would like to be, we students of philosophy, we would like to use some epoche and try to look at things in a more as objective as we can. And it's a little bit unfair when it comes to administration, when it comes to the students in those particular things. But yes, Dr. Machenzo, I think it's going to be towards the end part, where, for example, parang sa recommendation part siguro, doon lalabas yung discussion ko tungkol doon sa academic freedom in the pandemic. Not even the pandemic, academic freedom and online learning in a more general sense.
Salamat po, Sir JV.
Thank you, Dr.
Sir Bob.
Salamat, Sir Bobby.
Okay, thank you,
Sir
Sir
Bob.
Bobby. Yes, Franz?
Yes. Pwede magtanong din kay Sir JV.
Sige, yung Sir Franz.
Hello, sir. Ito matagal na rin nagpapa-isip sa akin tungkol sa academic freedom. Kasi yung mga nababasa ko tungkol sa academic freedom usually mga intellectuals na nanggagaling sa mga universities owned by the public. Parang mga public universities usually. So it's the taxpayers' money paying for these universities and the university professors and the researchers who are doing. Kaya nakikita ko ang worldview nila talagang pera namin to. So dapat may karapatan talaga kami magsalita. Dapat hindi ito pinipigilan ng university. Kasi nga, these universities are owned by the people, are owned by the citizens. Kaya lang ang nakikita ko sa atin sa Pilipinas, usually naman ay owned by by private individuals or even private groups. Like for example, a Catholic institution like UST, for example, is not publicly owned. So isn't it that a private person has the right? Kasi if he is the owner of a particular university, for example, can he or she not dictate also some terms? Ito hindi ko alam, hindi ko alam ang sagot sa mga bagay nito. Talagang itinatanong ko lang na, pwede bang sabihin halimbawa ng UST na dapat ganito lang ituturo niyo when it comes to to abortion or to same-sex marriage? Kasi this is our school, we own this, so we also should dictate the terms.
Exactly.
So paano kaya sasagot ng mga ganitong bagay, Sir JB?
Yeah. Doc, actually, yan din mga problema ko kasi nga hindi ko nga alam kung paano ko isusulat to right now. Nakita nyo may outline, no? Nakita nyo yung outline ko. Pero nag-iisip-isip ako, paano ko isusulat talaga itong mga to? Hindi ko alam kung saan ako papunta. To be really honest, for example, I'll give you a concrete example, Sir Franz. A couple of years ago, several years ago, the CBCP, the Catholic Bishops Conference of the Philippines, issued may Latin term, I forgot issued a mandatum. They issued a mandatum to all Catholic schools, to all Catholic schools, that those who are teaching religion, Christian ethics, should be married. Single or married in the Catholic Church. You know what happened? For example, in the College of Nursing, there were faculty members who were, married only by the state, civil marriage lang, and they've been teaching this subject for a decade or so, and because of this mandatum, it was removed from them and given to somebody else who fits the qualification set by the CBCP. And I said that was a violation of academic freedom. It's a violation of the teacher's rights. But yun na nga, because sabi nga ng Supreme Court, the institution determines who to teach. So, magulo. Kaya kasi nga, wala pang klaro. Even the Supreme Court was not clear in their decisions regarding those cases. Wala pa naman kasi ako nakitang sa Philippines, I'm talking in the Philippine context, wala pa naman ako nakitang kaso sa Pilipinas na academic freedom related to teaching. Relating to pedagogy pala, related to pedagogy or related to research. Most of our cases in the Philippines on academic freedom is only about employment. Ganun pa lang. So hindi ko pa rin alam Sir Doc Franz, paano ko sasagutin yan. And hopefully I can find an answer once I define Kant's concept of a university. Yun ang hope ko eh. Yung definition ni Kant ng university, doon ko sana makita kung paano natin i-define academic freedom, kung ma-define natin kung ano ang university. Kasi I can't pronounce the German words. I can't really recall but the concept of academic freedom actually emanated from the German universities. So
kasi baka, Sir JB, baka pwedeng invoke din yung mga clients, yung tinatawag nating clients, yung students. Isn't it that they have a right? Kasi nagbayad naman sila kahit private institutions yung pinasukan nila, like UST, nagbayad sila. So, dapat free rin yung kanilang, yung knowledge na makukuha nila is talagang dapat hindi rin one-sided. Baka pwede rin yung mga ganong ideas ba?
Yes.
I just don't know.
Kaya nga kanina, yung presentation ko kanina, sabi ko, yung academic freedom falls into, is exercised by three entities: the institution, the faculty, and the students. So, yun nga, parang hindi well-defined kanino napupunta yung mga powers. Ganun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Franz.
Hello, JV, may I?
Yes, bossing.
Paolo.
Alam ko,
Thank you.
alam ko na
Thank you,
sasabihin.
Bob. Hello, JV, kumusta?
Ito, long hair na rin ako, pare. Long hair na rin.
Wala, talo ka pa rin.
Umahabol.
Pagupit na nga ako, mas mahaba pa rin buhok ko sa'yo. Anyway, salamat. Thank you I'd like to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Ben.
I agree that the idea of academic freedom, especially here in the Philippines, is a bit vague, which contributes to the difficulty of coming up with a clear-cut definition of what it is, and who should enjoy it, right? But my I think your project should be pursued, I suppose, in a sense that even if you admit that you don't know how to proceed yet at this point, I think academic freedom is something that we have to discuss, not only as a department, but as a community of academics, including of course the students, and of course the administration, maybe especially the administration. It's something that we usually use, the term academic freedom, but rarely do we have a clear understanding of what it
It's not even here.
is. So yeah, I hope that your study is able to provide
Light.
at least initiate discourse, right? Now, however, my concern really, I have several concerns based on your presentation and the ensuing discussion. First of all is the vagueness of the idea of academic freedom. So you asked the question about don't exactly recall how you said it, but it has something to do with pedagogy and who has control of pedagogy.
That's one of the
yes. Is it the administration or is it the faculty? Given that the faculty is already a pool of experts, right? But my issue with regard to that is I think there is a serious misunderstanding today of how pedagogy, how we should teach. I think there's in terms of pedagogy, I think there's too much emphasis on method, right? And it seems like the purpose of substance is a bit neglected, or the importance of substance is a bit neglected, or content rather, right? I think the issue or the debate revolves around the idea of method and content. I think there's too much emphasis on method and not too much on, not enough rather, on content. That's why with all these policy changes that we have through CHED and through the universities, people think that it could be remedied by conducting retooling, retooling seminars.
Yeah.
I don't think any. I believe rather that any retooling, it doesn't matter how many retooling seminars you attend. I don't think that it's enough, right? For you to be able to to say that you're already an expert in the particular field. No number of retooling could actually make you an expert. But however, part of this emphasis or obsession with method is precisely our obsession also with retooling. So that's a problem for me. Kasi yun na nga we think that retooling is a quick fix, but as a matter of fact, it is not. I think I'll sound conservative, but I think the traditional rigorous process of really going through years and years of study is not I think is more important than method, because content will define or will determine method.
Exactly.
Especially,
I
narinig
I
pa
agree.
ba ako?
Yeah. I strongly agree with that. One of
And
yes, sorry. Go ahead, Pao. Hello? I can't hear Pao.
Sir Pao. Naputol si Sir Pao.
sorry, nawala ko. Narinig ba yung last na sinabi ko?
Hindi, sir. Nawala ka.
You were mentioning, Sir Pao, about content as more
Hello?
relatable. Sir Pao.
Hello?
Pao, the last thing we
Yeah, I think, yeah, hello? Am I, yeah.
the last we heard about from you was about there was more more emphasis on method than content.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that for me, content is more important because content actually determines method, not the other way around.
I agree.
Yun. So, narinig ba ako?
Yeah. I agree with that, sir.
And then lastly, JV, last point. I think the problem today is that administrators, the way they manage schools, I believe, doesn't have anything to do with learning at all. Because there's emphasis on metrics.
There was one, I'd like to comment on that, sir. There was a news bulletin that came out, I think it was in the Times, that said that academic freedom was actually being attacked by accreditation because of the demand for accreditation. Administrators now are so obsessed to fulfilling the checklist of these accreditors, and in a way it goes against the freedoms of the faculty and even of the students. Yun ang nakikita ko doon, Sir Pao. But
okay, I didn't hear it because wala yung connection ko. Pero papanoorin ko na lang yung recording ni Aldrin. Pero last point na lang, JV. Yung last point, ang gusto kong sabihin din, I think because I mentioned the problem of method and too much emphasis on method. I think the way that universities today are being managed, it doesn't have anything to do with real education anymore. Because the preoccupation is actually playing the game of metrics and not learning. So the obsession is about ranking, metrics, bibliometrics, method, pedagogy, pedagogy in terms of method, pero it's not about learning anymore. So there's really a problem with I think that the problem involves the idea of academic freedom. But you might want to consider also just a suggestion in support of your project. Yung of academic freedom. Yes, indeed, the idea comes up quite often in German philosophy, in German literature, especially on the idea of the university. Pero I think the idea dates as far back as even the ancient Greeks. Pero I think the clearest definition or idea of academic freedom is actually the medieval idea of academic freedom, which is quite straightforward. It is the freedom of faculty and students, freedom of faculty to teach, and the freedom of students to learn without too much interference from the state. That's the definition of the medieval idea uh, of uh, of academic freedom. So baka nga hindi nga natin pinag-uusapan, pero for example, yung naging issue natin with the anti-terror bill has something to do with academic freedom. Hindi pa lang natin nararamdaman ngayon kasi inuuna nila yung celebrities na i-red tag. Pero eventually, red tag rin siguro yung academics. So yun lang muna.
Yeah.
Okay.
The farthest that I've searched about academic freedom is from Aristotle. Dun sa, hindi ko rin ma-pronounce eh. Basta kay Aristotle ko pinaka-earliest ko nakita yung concept of academic freedom. Thank you, Bossing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Sir Pao. So maybe we can accommodate another question. It's only 7:43. Wala na.
Ayaw mo, passing mo. Si Sir Reyes ba to? Ray. Sir Ray.
Pumasok si Sir Ray. Kumakato kanina eh.
Magandang gabi, Sir Ray. Just to add, I also looked at CBAs. Yung UST CBA, walang mention of academic freedom. Yung lalo na yung bago. Kaya nga kung susundan, this is dangerous. I'm telling you guys, this is dangerous. Kasi the moment the administration says this is how you're gonna teach it, and if they follow the definition of Randy David, yari tayo doon.
They should read your paper, sir.
They should read my paper first before they issue any memo. So wala na po yata. Okay. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Sir JB.
Sir Bob.
So, Sir Anton.
Sir Bob?
Should I start na?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nandiyan na yung screen ko.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So there was some confusion kasi when I first asked about how much time am I given to present, ang first instruction ko was around 40 minutes. And then I received another instruction na around 15 minutes lang. So siguro I'll just strike a balance and try to finish this at around mga 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, so my study is concerned about a philosopher whom I wrote a dissertation about. And this is about Allan Gerwith's principle of generic consistency to global policies on human rights in a post-pandemic world. Uh, Instead of trying to update you as regards my research, I've decided na since yung principle of generic consistency is a rather confusing concept, I would rather just explain it and give a lecture on it, and then say something about the direct and indirect applications of the PGC, and listen to a very, very short commentary on the UN, by the UN as regards human rights. Then we can start to talk about it. Okay. So so here we have three questions now by Allan Gerwith, and this is about morality. So the question, or the three questions that is supposed to be answered by morality are these three. The authoritative question, why should one be moral? Uh, there is the distributive question, whose interest na should it be, and what are supposed to be the criteria by which we can select the interests, no, of persons. And the third is substantive, no? Substantive, which interests ought to be given priority based upon its importance and the value placed upon it. So he Gewert, no, divides the questions into three. And the most critical of them all is the authoritative question. So why should one be moral? Because in this question, based on Gewert's philosophy, we would be led to a single supreme moral principle. And from this moral principle, we would be able to answer the other two. So questions of justice, and questions of both substantive and procedural justice could be dealt with if we can be able, or if we are able to achieve, no, rationally a proof of the supreme moral principle. And in trying to answer these questions, there must be characteristics that must be in place. No? It should not beg the question, or it should not be circular. It must be determinate, and it should be conclusive in a way that it cannot be rationally challenged. When we say determinate, it means that from the same principle, you cannot justify two opposite courses of action. So dapat, from, if you have a principle, it should give us one course of action. Okay. So Sigurd searches for a subject matter which will always be concerned directly or indirectly with morality. And according to him, this is action. So action is the main, no, object of ethics. And according to him, this is action which includes features, including features which are common to all those engaged into it. Something which he calls the generic features of action. So there's no contest about this. No, most of the philosophers center ethics on human action, and even in Thomism, we consider the human acts, no, as a formal object of ethics. Now, the main issue of Gewert is deriving the ought from the is. This has been a major issue in ethics, and we have received a lot of answers historically from this, even from David Hume, even from Kant, and even from the traditional philosophers. So he is part of this, no, but it is the PGC that would serve as the basis by which this can be derived. So he also mentions that deduction is the basis by which, oh sorry, The deduction is the basis by which we could be able to educe, no, the supreme moral principle. So after a thorough discussion as to the merits of his contention, Gerwith concludes that there are two generic features of action: voluntariness and purposiveness. He spent a lot of time, no, or pages in trying to justify the exhaustiveness of the two. So he narrowed it down to voluntariness and purposiveness. So while the content of morality is action, the content of action is narrowed down into two: voluntariness and purposiveness. So even in Thomistic philosophy, this is also apparent, no? Acting for an end and voluntariness, even from St. Thomas Aquinas. But the definition is this, no? Voluntariness involves the procedural aspects of action, setting the direction by means by which such is handled, while purposiveness involves both the procedural and substantive aspects of action, serving as the end towards which action is directed. So in relation to the agent, no, when voluntariness is present, we normally call it freedom. And so it becomes a value in itself, no, freedom. While purposiveness in relation to the agent can be considered as his well-being. So if you look for something, if you try to achieve something, then that is something worthwhile to you, and that must be something at the same time. So purposiveness is directly linked to well-being. In fact, some contemporary philosophers consider ethics as revolving around well-being. Aside from from utilitarianism, where happiness is or pleasure and pain are the basic components of their consequentialism. Some philosophers actually centered on well-being as an object of purposiveness. So it's very simple, no? The notion of rationality by Gerwith. For him, if you accept a concept A and A entails B, C, and D, then a rational agent who accepts A would avoid contradiction by accepting B, C, and D. So ganun lang, no? Very simple, no? Very deductive, very minimal yung concept niya ng rationality. It means if A entails B, C, and D, any person who accepts A must accept B, C, and D, as long as these three are entailed by A, or they entail certain concepts. No? So you have to accept what follows. So if after A, for example, you said you mentioned that you're going to you would want to attain a certain degree. Of course, what is the first entailment to that is for you to enroll and then finish all your requirements and then finish your thesis, for instance. So B, C, and D. In other words, if you say that you want to achieve a degree but you did not enroll, you are irrational from the Gerwithian point of view. He's already giving a hint, no? Kasi here, he's going to put out the entailments of action itself. So, if you engage in action, what are the entailments? And there are three. And by the time you reach three, you have already achieved the supreme moral principle. Okay? Okay, so what is the methodology of Gerwith? He calls it the dialectically necessary method. No? Dialectics is a common concept in philosophy, starting from Socrates and Aristotle. You begin with a statement and then you try to deduce what this logically implies. But Gerwith distinguishes two kinds of dialectics, no? The dialectically contingent and the dialectically necessary. If, for example, dialectically contingent statement is upon you, then all the rest of the deductions, no, or the entailments are also contingent. For example, if I say I want to earn a PhD in philosophy, all the entailments following that is applicable to me, but not applicable to my mother, not applicable to my brothers, because it is only applicable to me. And being such, it is contingent in that sense. But there's something different, no? It's different when it comes to action, because all men are engaged in action. So if any person engages in action, and we can say generally all men engages in some form of action, then they should accept, no, the entire humankind should accept the entailments of action and its generic features of voluntariness and purposiveness. So he calls it the dialectically necessary method. Kasi it must follow. Or else, if somebody would not follow, then that person would not even follow the implications of his rationality. Okay. So, thus simply put, a rational person for Gerwith is one who accepts the simple and direct entailments of his judgments, taking steps to maintain consistency and avoidance of self-contradiction as regards what are logically involved in his own action as he pursues the latter voluntarily and purposively. So, set na yan, ano? Through the dialectically necessary method, we are supposed to arrive at the principle of generic consistency. Okay, how do we start? We start with assumptions. So this is like a thesis, no? What Gerwith is trying to prove us, no? May methodology, may content, and may assumptions then. So what are the assumptions? He assumes that action has a normative structure. Why normative structure? You have evaluative statements, no? And when there are evaluative statements, you could deduce sometimes, no, in certain evaluative statements, performative, deontic, and normative statements. Like, for example, I would tell you, there's a snake behind your back. That's an evaluative statement, no? You're saying, oh, there's a snake behind my back. Pero you do not accept it as evaluative, no? You cannot say, oh, tama ka, there's a snake behind my back. No, when you say there's a snake behind your back, you're actually telling him to duck, to avoid, or to run away. But it appears in an evaluative form. But it implies performative statements, and actually, sometimes even to the point na it becomes a duty for you. So, deontic siya. So, in short, the assumption of Gerwith is that action has a normative structure. So, when you deal with action, it is a structurally normative, even if it contains evaluative propositions. Okay, so how do we put this into one statement from which we could derive all the other entailments? So action with its generic features of voluntariness and purposiveness is expressed in this way. I do X for purpose E. Now, if you will observe this statement, I do X for purpose E, action is there. Kasi I do. Purposiveness is there. I do X for purpose E. And voluntariness is there because of the word I. So here we can see action and purposiveness and voluntariness all in one statement. I do X for purpose E. Now the next step is trying to draw out the entailments of I do X for purpose E. And these are the entailments. So the linguistic expression of action consists of three entailments. First, agents recognize the goodness of his purposes or ends, and from this makes an evaluative judgment as regards the necessary goodness of his own freedom and well-being. So the first entailment is, it must be necessary for you. It must be good for you. Why is it necessary? Because all men are engaged in action. Why is it good? Because you actually engage in action. That is why if we're going to punish a person and we take away his freedom and we take away well-being, then that's the worst punishment we can give to a person. Because even historically, freedom and well-being are such values na they are used to deprive, uh, they are used, no, to in order to deprive a person of his dignity and to punish him. You take away his freedom and well-being. That's how we punish persons, even up until now. So, yung recognition, no, of the importance of freedom and well-being is a universal experience. And then he jumps from evaluative to deontic and says, from this acceptance as regards the necessary goodness of freedom and well-being, he makes a deontic judgment that he has rights to this. Okay? Now, in what way would it, uh, quote-unquote, jump from evaluative statement to a deontic judgment? Now, a lot of philosophers actually questioned this second step. And my entire dissertation was actually uh, focused on defending Gerwith as regards to the second step. In short, bakit ganun, ano? For example, I value this pencil uh, and give it much importance to me. And I would say this is important to me. Does it follow that I make a right claim and this pencil is mine and say this pencil is mine? It doesn't follow, no, based on common sense, no, that it doesn't follow na if you say this is important to me, therefore I make a right claim to it. But it follows. Kasi the only reason why you're not getting it is because there are certain hindrances, no? For example, a certain person, you say, I love you, and you make an evaluative statement that you love him or her, and then everything is okay with the parents, everything is okay with the person himself, everything is okay as regards society, and there are no problems. If you do not eventually take him or her as your husband or wife, kaya questioning ka niya, di ba? He's going to say, oh, akala ko ba I'm important to you? But there's nothing hindering you from marrying me. So, naglalay ka, right? So, lilitaw, naglalay ka. Kasi, it's not consistent. Kasi together with the evaluative statement of importance is a right claim. And the only reason why the right claim is not being applied is because of certain hindrances, like he's married, you're married, she's married, or whatever, or there is a resistance from the parents or whatever, or whomever. So, may hadlang, no? Kaya lang di mo siya kinukuha. Pero, a statement of importance is a statement of a right claim. Now, this is very crucial in Gerwithian philosophy. Kasi if you make a right claim to freedom and well-being, that is the beginning of generic rights. Because a claim leads to rights. Bakit? You are claiming it against another person. And if that is rational, then that person would eventually begin to have a duty to accept and allow you to have these rights. Okay? And then for the third is the application of principle of generalizability, which I will explain later. Okay, let's go into details as regards the first. No, so as regards the first, Gerwith clarifies that the purpose and end of this argument has a generic criteria. So at this point in time, no, there's still no moral issue here. It's simply allowing persons to value all their generic features. So here is Hitler, who values his generic rights. He wants to kill the Jew in order for the Aryan race to develop, to propagate the Aryan race. So there's respect for it. And this person who simply wants to live, the Jew, he wants to live. He values his own life. So he has generic importance. No? And everybody is important at this point in time. So it is still morally neutral. However, when it comes to the second, the agent must hold that he has rights to these generic features. This stems from the notion that action has both an evaluative and deontic structure. So through its evaluative structure, the agent makes a judgment as regards the necessity of generic features. And through its deontic structure, he accepts the logical consequence of making a right claim. At this point, a rational claim to one's generic rights is made. So this is how the right is born. Kasi we need this in philosophy, even in law. Kasi for instance, no, in law, we have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But how do you justify the Universal Declaration on Human Rights? You cannot just say, for example, right against as a right against slavery. How could we justify that? Right to anything. Right against arbitrary imprisonment. Where would we justify that? We cannot just enumerate rights. And sometimes even the lawmakers, no, those who formulated the human declaration, universal declaration on human rights, sometimes there's some politics in that. For instance, no, can you use that to set a side on abortion, or if you're pro-abortion or anti-abortion? You cannot use the Universal Declaration on Human Rights because the wording itself is vague. For example, it says na everyone has the right to life. But is everyone comprehensive enough to include the fetus? Is fetus a part of the scope of everyone? So that is subject to law, subject to definition. So there is a need, no, for a rational justification of the human rights. Okay. So this right has a prudential corollary, which is a right claim against other persons that the latter owe him non-interference as regards his freedom and well-being. So it's very strict. So we must let him or assist him in the generic features. At the same time, at least not to interfere. So in linguistic terms, this has a strong illocutionary force. Or in terms of hair, this has a very powerful tropic. The strength, no, by which the statement mandates. So this is very strict, and this is what makes the PGC unique, the strictness of this claim. Okay, as I shall explain later. Okay, now the third, the application of the principle of universalizability. This is the formula, no? If a person S has certain rights stemming from a justificatory quality Q, then any other person who possesses this quality has the same right. I modified this principle kasi ma-confuse yung iba. So, for example, if a certain student has a right to enter the AB building, and the AB building is entering the AB building is a justificatory quality of being a student is a justificatory quality, then all students must be able to enter the AB building. In law, we call this the principle of equity. However, whenever the Supreme Court mentions equity, it doesn't state this formula. Ang sinasabi ng Supreme Court, all those who are similarly situated must be treated similarly. That is how the principle of equity is applied in law. But in philosophy, we have a formula for it. No? If we have a S and it stems from a quality Q and quality Q justifies S, then all those who have S must have the same right. Okay. So, the third applies, no, the principle of universalizability to all the right claims. Okay. Now, this is now the principle of generic consistency. An agent confirms this realization as regards the universalizability of these features. And this precept is addressed to all agents. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So the PGC is this, no? Act in accord with the generic rights of your recipients as well as of yourself. This is what Gerwith calls the principle of generic consistency. You have to apply all the generic rights from yourself to your recipients. So it's fairly simple, no? But the process is a bit tedious. However, there's a difference, no, between the PGC and the other moral norms. Like for example, si Kant, di ba? Si Kant also has this kind of formula, the categorical imperative. So Gerwith also has this, but this one is able to resolve certain rights. So the applications, no, of direct applications of the PGC, no, there are direct and indirect applications. Yung indirect applications can guide us in setting certain restrictions to policy on pandemic implementation or pandemic rule implementation. That is why I will not discuss this anymore now, but I will just give one example. Explain also some other things. So in duty to rescue, for instance, or duty not to hurt people. For example, the Jew, no, makes a right claim to a basic good. But Hitler makes a right claim based on his fancies, no? That he wants an Aryan race that is well developed. He wants to expand his Reich. So all of these are considered under additive goods only. But the right claim of the Jew is a basic right. So therefore, the PGC will not allow Hitler to kill the Jew, because the right claim of the Jew is higher. So the only way, no, since it is mandatory, no, the only way by which we can stop respecting freedom and well-being is only whenever we have a counter claim which is higher. So for example, no, non-subtractive goods, a good wherein what you already have is retained. I own this ball pen today, and I will own this ball pen or pencil tomorrow. Then it's a non-subtractive good, retaining what I have. Additive good is improvements, no, in qualitative improvements or even quantitative improvements. And basic good is right to life, etc. No, as we normally understand this. But there's a catch, no, with the PGC. For example, a person in Africa is hungry. So he makes a right claim to life. And here I am in the Philippines. I have my money. And I want to buy an expensive watch. What would the PGC say? So I'm making a right claim on an additive good, which is to be able to use my money to buy a watch. But he's making a right claim for his life. So I have now the duty to rescue. The PGC will not allow me to buy the watch as long as somebody's dying. So that is the power of the PGC. No, it mandates, it it gives us a strong mandate to respect freedom and well-being. And the only thing that we can avoid is, like, for example, somebody's drowning and I'm also drowning, so I have to save myself before I save him. And if I save myself, then I am not immoral, no? In PGC terms, we're not saving another. Or if he is killing me and then I kill him, then he upsets the balance, so I bring back the balance and kill him eventually. So there's a complicated interplay of proportionalities here. Now, in the indirect applications of we have this now: optional, procedural, static, instrumental, necessary, procedural, and dynamic uh, instrumental. These are justification of social rules. No, when we say optional, procedural, we say uh, voluntary associations. To. So everybody who wants to join, they must follow. Parang League of Nations to eh. The problem with the League of Nations is that before World War II, it was not able to prevent World War II because countries simply went out of the League of Nations and they are relieved of any form of obligation to follow. Now, the static instrumental, uh, well-being is being achieved, but it assumes that everybody has equal rights. In contrast to dynamic instrumental, wherein well-being is being achieved, but it is assumed that there are no equal rights. So another step is added wherein we try to balance things. Like for example, here in the Philippines, no, we should be using dynamic instrumental because there is inequality here. And when we apply the provision of well-being, then we should assume that we are not equal because the poor actually are weaker than those who have money. And the necessary procedural is unlike voluntary associations, no, there's a method of consent in inherent, and once the method of consent has been set, then everybody follows. This is more or less like the democracy in the United States, supposedly, no, but not in the eyes of Trump, no. But some people would want, no, to follow this form of justification of social rules. I will discuss this in my paper because this is what we will use now. And we have the is-ought problem, ancillary issues with the PGC and human rights, starvation, civil disobedience, civil liberties as effective powers. So the arguments, no, as regards these topics will determine constraints, no, constraints to emergency responses. So constraints on action in general, constraints on freedom, constraints on well-being, constraints on the direct and indirect applications. So this will be the content of my paper, no, based on the contentions of the PGC. Uh, of course, that is, I think that the PGC would be able to contribute. Kasi when we were hit by the pandemic, there was much confusion, no? And according to the United Nations, there is a lot of governments, no, forgot about human rights. Okay. So before I begin to, I'll just get 3 more minutes of your time. I want to start the ball rolling by listening to a 3-minute presentation by the United Nations as regards human rights.
It is an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a human crisis that is fast becoming a human rights crisis. In February, I launched a call to action to put human dignity and the promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the core of our work. As I said then, human rights cannot be an afterthought in times of crisis, and we now face the biggest international crisis in generations. Today, I am releasing a report highlighting how human rights can and must guide COVID-19 response and recovery. The message is clear. People and their rights must be front and center. The human rights lens puts everyone in the picture and ensures that no one is left behind. Human rights responses can help beat the pandemic, putting a focus on the imperative of health care for everyone. But they also serve as an essential warning system, highlighting who is suffering most, why, and what can be done about it. We have seen how the virus does not discriminate, but its impacts do, exposing deep weaknesses in the delivery of public services and structural inequalities that impede access to them. We must make sure they are properly addressed in the response. We see the disproportionate effects on certain communities, the rise of hate speech, the targeting of vulnerable groups, and the risk of heavy-handed security responses undermining the health response. Against the background of rising ethno-nationalism, populism, authoritarianism, and the pushback against human rights in some countries, the crisis can provide a pretext to adopt repressive measures for purposes unrelated to the pandemic. This is unacceptable. More than ever, governments must be transparent, responsive, and accountable. Civic space and press freedom are critical. Civil society organizations and the private sector have essential roles to play. And in all we do, let's never forget, the threat is the virus, not people. We must ensure that any emergency measures, including states of emergency, are legal, proportionate, necessary, and non-discriminatory, have a specific focus and duration, and take the least intrusive approach possible to protect public health. The best response is one that responds proportionately to immediate threats while protecting human rights and the rule of law. Looking ahead, we need to build back better. The Sustainable Development Goals, which are underpinned by human rights, provide the framework for more inclusive and sustainable economies and societies. Strengthening economic and social rights bolsters resilience for the long haul. The recovery must also respect the rights of future generations, enhancing climate action aiming at carbon neutrality by 2050 and protecting biodiversity. We are all in this together. The virus threatens everyone. Human rights uplift everyone. By respecting human rights in this time of crisis, we will build more effective and inclusive solutions for the emergency of today and the recovery for tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay. So that concludes my lecture and directives of my or directions of my study. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Robert Montaña. So the convergence of all the three presentations today is on human rights and human dignity. So we have here the presentation of Sir Ener, Sir JB on academic freedom, and then this time about human rights. Si Allan Gerwith is not is less explored in our institution, and it's Dr. Robert Montaña who is really seriously exploring the philosophy of Allan Gerwith. So now we hear from the body. Are there questions? We now open the floor for your comments, suggestions, and questions to Dr. Robert Montaña.
Nakatulog yata sila, Franz. Sa maabang lecture ko.
Nag-iisip pa ng ikaw yung last report kasi sir, sa last presentation in our last webinar for the year, for the academic, for the first semester.
Sana
So
naman,
medyo exhausted.
2021 would be better, no? Bugbog na bugbog tayo ngayong ano ah.
What led you to Allan Gerwith, Sir Bob?
Napansin ko kasi they were talking about him eh. I mean, in the articles that I have read on human rights, they were talking about him. Sino ba itong Allan Gerwith na to? But yes, no, walang works dito. Wala siyang works sa Pilipinas. Okay. So, pumunta ako sa UST, there was a secondary work about him. But yung mga books niya wala rito. So, yun, kinuha ko pa lahat sa United States, no? Nakiusap pa ako for some of my friends in order to purchase his books. Kasi absolutely unknown siya dito. And when I was writing my dissertation, yun talaga yung gusto ko rin. Alam mo yan, kasi to contribute to the field, di ba? Kasi let's say, magbanggit ako ng ibang philosophers na sikat na. Baka inuulit ko lang yung Ayan si Sir Ray, raising his hand.
Hello, Ray. Hi, Bob. Okay, Sir Ray, you're recognized.
Yeah. Dinig na ako? Dinig na
yes,
ba?
Sir.
Hey, Bob, human rights.
Sige, sir.
What is the first question? What is the basis of human rights for Gerwith? Number two, what would be his take on death penalty as a human right? That's all.
Yung human rights, sir, would for Gerwith, no? Human right is dependent on the implications of action. So, pag nag-engage tayo into action, there are certain implications. And the implications, no, rational implications, would lead us, no, to make a right claim rationally. So, necessary entailment siya yung right claim. And if we're going to universalize the right claim, then basically that is
because right is what is due, right? What is due? Right is what is due, right?
What is due from the right claim, sir? Sa
yes. Now, what is the basis of what is due? Does he believe on natural law?
Wala, sir.
Wala siyang natural law. So therefore,
kasi siya foundationally, sir.
So
right
he speaks of human acts, right? Yes. Yes. So what would be, is there right or wrong human action for him?
There is, sir.
Yes. And what is the basis whether the human act is right or wrong?
Right claim, sir.
Right claim. Now, when you say right claim, again, it must have a basis. What is now the basis when you say, I have a right claim? For example, a criminal may say, I have a right claim to kill you. So what is the basis?
You cannot kill me, sir, kasi I have a right claim then to protect my life.
Oh, so therefore, there must be something outside the criminal and you that will determine whether the action is right or wrong, right?
Ay, hindi, sir. Kasi sa Gerwithian philosophy kasi ganito.
May objective morality ba siya, Bob? May objective morality.
Yung objective niya, nandun naka-center doon sa action and its generic features, sir.
So for example, murder is objectively wrong.
Na it is wrong kasi it is against the PGC, sir. Kasi it doesn't consider the right claim of the other person. Pero you
Yes,
can
agree.
kill the other person if you have a better right claim.
Okay,
For
good.
example, he's trying to kill you.
Yes,
So,
okay. Now,
your
you
claim
say
was
right claim. No, right claim. Why do you say it's a right claim? What is the basis of being right claim?
like, for example, sir, he's trying to kill you and you will eventually kill him. Mas malakas yung right claim mo, sir, kasi
Why?
right to life ka, basic.
Oh,
Plus,
so you're right to life. So right to life is objectively good, right?
hindi, sir. Based sa claim lang kasi, sir. Kasi nga, I'm engaged in action. So,
Yes.
yung primary...
But you see, every claim, you know, Bob, every claim requires or presupposes some kind of basis.
Yun nga, sir.
So
Internal.
what is the basis
Then
of the
it is projected outside.
So
by
it is
the principle of universalizability,
so
sir.
it becomes personal claim.
At the onset.
You mentioned about universal claim for him. May consistency, sabi mo, di ba? May universal claim.
Application na ng universalizability yun. Third step yun,
Okay.
sir.
Na pag sinabi mong
Becomes
universal,
objective after the third step.
pag sinabi mong universal claim, it must be good at least to all or to some, right?
But it's good because of the right claims of all.
So yeah, it appears therefore
Hindi siya
now
tumisim
reverts.
kasi, sir, kasi teleological yung tumisim, sir, eh. Ito
Hindi,
kasi,
teka.
ito may pagka-Descartes kasi, sir.
Oo nga, so lumalabas talagang yung kanyang morality is more on subjective claim.
Kaya nga, ang category niya, sir, rationalist, foundationalist.
Rationalist. Okay. Now, regarding death penalty, what do you think would be the take of Gerwith?
Okay. In death penalty, sir, it depends on the right claim pa rin of the person who will eventually kill you.
But it is the state's right to execute a criminal, right? So the state has a claim.
Depende sa justification by which the state was made, sir.
So you are admitting that the state may have a right to kill a criminal.
Ito, sir, ay, teka, isi-share ko ulit ito, para...
Maybe I missed it.
Kasi, sir, ito yun, eh.
So justified bang state?
So, kunyari, sir, yung state, no, was made under the static instrumental justification or made through the necessary procedural, no? So, may method of consent, eh. Like, for example, no, nagkaroon ng procedural justification wherein the people gave the state the right to kill, then everybody would fall under that right, no? Yung necessary procedural justification. So, kapag nabigyan natin yung state by our consent, parang Rousseau, sir, pag binigyan natin sila ng right to kill us, then nagkakaroon ng right ng state.
So you're saying the right of the state to execute a criminal is based on people's consent?
Kung yung state ay ginawa, sir, based on this kind of justification. Kasi there are different states, sir, in how it was concocted.
Or does it speak also of common good?
Oo, may common good, sir. Like, itong dalawang instrumental na to, sir, this refers to well-being. Common good yan, ano? Pero ito, sir, assumes na all are equal, no? May egalitarian assumption to. Yung dynamic, wala. So, therefore, yung instrumental, dynamic instrumental, it balances first the rights of the members before leading them towards common good.
So, in the name of common good, the state has the right to execute a criminal.
If the state was made under static instrumental and dynamic instrumental.
So, yes. Okay. So, pwede. May rights siya ang state.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And in that case, therefore, the criminal has no right to life. Or in that case, the criminal has the right to life against now the right to execute on the part of the state. So which one now prevails?
Ay, sa conflict of rights, sir,
Ayan, okay, that's good.
ma-override ng indirect application ng PGC.
So what now the answer?
May right siya because he makes a right claim, sir.
Sino yung criminal?
Kaya lang,
Yung criminal, may right siya.
Supersedes the, ano, sir, the...
Teka muna, Bob, yung criminal may right.
Kasi may right claim siya, sir.
Yes, and the state may right din.
Ako, perspective ng PGC, sir, hindi ito mism.
Oo, it's okay. Hindi, ang sinusundan ko na yung argument mo, hindi, wala akong kinalaman sa tumism. So may right yung criminal, may right din yung state. Ano ngayon ang prevail?
Yung state, sir, once na may justification siya ng social rules based
So
on
in the case of Gerwith, therefore, the right of the criminal is subjective.
No, may principle of universalizability, so it's protected by the PGC. However, if there are justification of social rules, like for example in a necessary procedural justification, he lives in a state wherein everybody agreed to give the state the right to kill, then kasama siya doon. Kasi just by staying in the state and allowing it to have jurisdiction, then sakop siya, sir, necessary procedural eh.
So so the right of the state to execute the criminal prevails over the right of the criminal.
If it is justified enough in this, if the social rules upon which it works, no, is justified.
For Gerwith, is the right to life inviolable?
Hindi, sir.
Hindi. So it can be violated.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Kasi kung ang right ng criminal, kung right to life is violable, can be violated. Therefore, the right also of the state can be violated.
Conflict of rights, sir. For example, my right to life, pero I'm trying to kill other persons. I lose that right to life.
So in the same case, the state now killing a person is now wala na siyang right. Kasi mali yung gagawin niya. He would be killing another person, the state.
Sinusupersede niya, sir. Sinusupersede ng social justification.
Okay. So, Bob, thank you sa clarification mo. Naiintindihan ko na ngayon anong position ni Gerwith. Thank you very much. With those questions, nakita ko yung mga assumptions at implications, especially regarding rights, human rights at saka universal rights. Thank you, Bob. It's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Sir Ray. Thank you, Bob, for the response. Meron pa pong question. We still have more or less 15 minutes. Baka meron pa pong gustong mag-clarify kay Sir Bob. Okay, mukhang wala na po. So, ilan pa tayo dito ngayon? There are 18 participants right now. So, first of all, maraming salamat po sa ating mga presenters today, Dr. Bob Montaña, Sir Gonzales, and Sir JV. Thank you for your presentation. And of course, we also take this opportunity to thank all the presenters starting September until now. So we had 8 work in progress sessions, and there are graduate students, of course, and faculty researchers who presented their research proposals and progress of their respective researches. So maraming salamat po. At kay Sir Pao, nandito po pa si Sir Pao. Salamat. Si Sir Pao po ang nagsimula ng legacy ng work in progress na itinutuloy po natin ngayon. So I think as early as 2012 or 2011, Sir Paulo Bolaños and a few members of the faculty of the philosophy department, faculty members of the philosophy department started the work in progress seminar. So maraming salamat po. Thank you for all those who participated since day one or until now. Meron po talagang consistent na nandito. Salamat din po kay Anton at saka kay Aldrin sa paghanda lagi ng ating session hall, ng ating virtual room. Maraming salamat. Okay, meron pa po, meron kami mga announcement pa kayo na so mukhang wala na. Wala tayong virtual Christmas party ang department. So, Merry Christmas po sa ating lahat. It's December 15 today, so that's 10 days before Christmas. 4 days before we receive our last salary for the year. So muli po, maraming salamat.
Wala ka bang Sir Franz? Wala kang ipapasabog, papamigay?
Ipapasabog ng ano?
Mga barya o ano?
Candies.
Prayers, so we can send prayers to everyone. Wish you all a happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
Merry Christmas to all. I miss you all.
Sir Ray, salamat po. At dumating kayo ngayon.
And Sir Ray.
Merry Christmas! Happy New Year! Huwag magpaputok sa loob. Sa labas kayo magpaputok.
Bawal, loob at labas. Quarantine. Quarantine. JB.
Sir.
Meron ka na palang booklet ng CBA. Pahiram, copy yung mga sa retirement.
Hindi, sir. Yun yung luma.
Meron academic freedom dyan, di ba?
Wala, sir.
Hindi, yung sa luma, meron. Ano ka?
Hindi defined. Yun yung ibig sabihin.
I-define. Sige na, hayaan mo na. I-define man, di naman sinusunod yun. Wala yan. Violation lahat yan.
Sa pool ni Sir Ray.
Oy, ang taba-taba mo, JB, ha? Double chin ka.
Nagbabike na nga ako eh.
Oy, lalo kang tataba sa bike. Mag-fasting ka, wag ka nang kumain ng isang beses.
Paskong-Pasko nang-aapi ka, sir, ha?
Ha? Ang ano?
Paskong-Pasko nang-aapi ka?
Minsan yung pang-aapi, nakakabuti.
Di ba against human dignity yan?
Alin? To correct someone, it's charitable, it's fraternal correction. Ano na. Salamat sa hindi na sana ako mag-join kaya lang alam mo naman si Bob, hinihintay ang ano ko niyan. Reaction ko. Pero maganda naman yung discussion niyo. Hindi nga ako makarelate, lalalim na eh.
Sige po.
Sige na, good evening sa lahat.
Salamat.
Salamat.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Good night po.
Thank you.
Thank you.